Anna spent the whole day at home, that is to say, at the Oblonskys', and refused to see any callers, although some of her friends, having learned of her arrival, came to see her. The whole morning was given to Dolly and the children. She sent a note to her brother that he must dine at home. "Come, God is merciful," she wrote. Oblonsky accordingly dined at home. The conversation was general, and his wife, when she spoke to him, called him "tui," thou, which had not been the case before. The relations between husband and wife remained cool, but nothing more was said about a separation, and Stepan Arkadyevitch saw the possibility of a reconciliation. Kitty came in soon after dinner. Her acquaintance with Anna Arkadyevna was very slight, and she was not without solicitude as to the welcome which she would receive from this great Petersburg lady, whose praise was in everybody's mouth. But she made a pleasing impression on Anna Arkadyevna. This she immediately realized. Anna evidently admired her youth and beauty, and Kitty was not slow in realizing a sense of being not only under her influence, but of being in love with her, and immediately fell in love with her, as young girls often fall in love with married women older than themselves. Anna was not like a society woman, or the mother of an 8-year-old son, but, by the vivacity of movement, by the freshness and animation of her face expressed in her smile and in her eyes, she would have been taken rather for a young girl of 20, had it not been for a serious and sometimes almost melancholy look, which struck and attracted Kitty. Kitty felt that she was perfectly natural and sincere, but that there was something about her that suggested a whole world of complicated and poetic interests far beyond her comprehension. After dinner, when Dolly had gone to her room, Anna went eagerly to her brother, who was smoking a cigar. "Stiva," she said, giving him a joyous wink, making the sign of the cross and glancing toward the door. "Go, and God help you." He understood her, and, throwing away his cigar, disappeared behind the door. As soon as she had gone, Anna sat down upon a divan, surrounded by the children. Either because they saw that their mamma loved this aunt, or because they themselves felt a special attraction toward her, the two eldest, and therefore the younger, as often happens with children, had taken possession of her even before dinner, and could not leave her alone. And now they were having something like a game, in which each tried to get next to her, to hold her little hand, to kiss her, to play with her rings, or even to cling to the flounces of her gown. "There, there, let us sit as we were before," said Anna, sitting down in her place. And Grisha, proud and delighted, thrust his head under his aunt's arm, and nestled up close to her. "And when is the ball?" she asked of Kitty. "Next week. It will be a lovely ball, one of those balls where one always has a good time." "Then there are places where one always has a good time?" asked Anna in a tone of gentle irony. "Strange, but it is so. We always enjoy ourselves at the Bobrishevs' and at the Nikitins', but at the Mezkovs' it is always dull. Haven't you ever noticed that?" "No, dusha moya, no ball could be amusing to me," said Anna, and again Kitty saw in her eyes that unknown world which had not yet been revealed to her. "For me they are all more or less tiresome." "How could you find a ball tiresome?" "And why should I not find a ball tiresome?" Kitty perceived that Anna foresaw what her answer would be. "Because you are the loveliest of all." Anna blushed easily. She blushed now and said, "In the first place, that is not true, and in the second, if it were, it would not make any difference." "Won't you go to this ball?" asked Kitty. "I think I would rather not go. Here, take it," she said to Tanya, who was drawing off a loose ring from her delicate white finger. "I should be delighted if you would go. I should so like to see you at a ball." "Well, if I have to go, I shall console myself with the thought that I am making you happy. Grisha, don't pull my hair down. It is disorderly enough now," she said, putting back the rebellious lock with which the lad was playing. "I can imagine you at a ball dressed in violet." "Why in violet?" asked Anna, smiling. "Now, children, run away. Run away. Don't you hear? Miss Hull is calling you to tea," said she, freeing herself from the children and sending them out of the dining room. "I know why you want me to go to the ball. You expect something wonderful to happen at this ball. and you are anxious for us all to be there so as to share in your happiness." "How did you know? You were right." "Oh, what a lovely age is yours," continued Anna. "I remember well, and know this purple haze like that which you see hanging over the mountains in Switzerland. This haze covers everything in that delicious time when childhood ends, and from out of this immense circle, so joyous, so gay, grows a footpath ever narrower and narrower, and leads gaily and painfully to that labyrinth, and yet it seems so bright and so beautiful. Who has not passed through it?" Kitty listened and smiled. How did she pass through it? How I should like to know the whole romance of her life, thought Kitty, remembering the unpoetic appearance of her husband, Alexey Alexandrovitch. "I know a thing or two," continued Anna. "Stiva told me, and I congratulate you. He pleased me very much. I met Vronsky at the station." "Oh, was he there?" asked Kitty, blushing. "What did Stiva tell you?" "Stiva told me the whole story, and I should be delighted. I came from Petersburg with Vronsky's mother," she continued, "and his mother never ceased to speak of him. He is her favorite. I know how partial mothers are, but—" "What did his mother tell you?" "Oh, many things, and I know that he is her favorite. But it is still evident he has a chivalrous nature. Well, for example, she told me how he wanted to give up his whole fortune to his brother, how he did something more wonderful when he was a boy, saved a woman from drowning. In a word, he is a hero," said Anna, smiling and remembering the 200 rubles which he had given at the station. But she did not tell about the 200 rubles. Somehow it was not pleasant for her to remember that. She felt that there was something in it that concerned herself too closely, and ought not to have been. "The countess urged me to come to see her," continued Anna, "and I should be very happy to meet her again, and I will go tomorrow. Thank the Lord, Stiva remains a long time with Dolly in the library," she added, changing the subject, and, as Kitty perceived, looking a little annoyed. "I'll be the first! No, I!" cried the children, who had just finished their supper and came running to their Aunt Anna. "All together," she said, laughing, and running to meet them. She seized them and piled them in a heap, struggling and screaming with delight. At tea time, Dolly came out of her room. Stepan Arkadyevitch was not with her. He had left his wife's chamber by the rear door. "I'm afraid you will be cold upstairs," remarked Dolly, addressing Anna. "I should like to have you come down and be near me." "Oh, please don't worry about me," replied Anna, trying to divine by Dolly's face if there had been a reconciliation. "Perhaps it would be too light for you here," said her sister-in-law. "I assure you I sleep anywhere and everywhere as sound as a woodchuck." "What is it?" asked Stepan Arkadyevitch, coming in from his library, and addressing his wife. By the tone of his voice, both Kitty and Anna knew that the reconciliation had taken place. "I wanted to install Anna downstairs, but we should have to put up some curtains. No one knows how to do it, and so I must," said Dolly, in reply to her husband's question. "God knows if they have wholly made it up," thought Anna, as she noticed Dolly's cold and even tone. "Ugh, don't. Dolly, don't make difficulties. Well, if you like, I will fix everything." Yes, thought Anna, they must have had a reconciliation. "I know how you do everything," said Dolly. "You give Matvey an order which it is impossible to carry out, and then you go away and he gets everything into a tangle." And her customary mocking smile wrinkled the corners of Dolly's lips as she said that. Complete reconciliation. Complete, thought Anna. Thank God. And rejoicing that she had been the cause of it, she went to Dolly and kissed her. "Not by any means. Why have you such scorn for Matvey and me?" said Stepan Arkadyevitch to his wife, with an almost imperceptible smile. Throughout the evening Dolly, as usual, was lightly ironical toward her husband, and Stepan Arkadyevitch was happy and gay, but within bounds, as if he wanted to make it evident that though he had obtained pardon, he had not forgotten his offense. About 9:30, a particularly animated and pleasant confidential conversation, which was going on at the tea-table, was interrupted by an incident apparently of the slightest importance, but this simple incident seemed to each member of the family to be very strange. They were talking about one of their Petersburg acquaintances when Anna suddenly arose. "I have her picture in my album," she said, "and at the same time I will show you my little Seroza," she added with a smile of maternal pride. It was usually about 10 o'clock when she bade her son good night. Often she herself put him to bed before she went out to parties, and now she felt a sensation of sadness to be so far from him. No matter what people were speaking about, her thoughts reverted always to her little curly-haired Seroza, and the desire seized her to go and look at his picture and to talk about him. Using this first pretext, she, with her light, decided step, started to fetch her album. The stairs to her room started from the landing place in the large staircase, which led from the heated hall. Just as she was leaving the drawing-room, the front door-bell rang. "Who can that be?" said Dolly. "It's too early to come after me, and it's too late for a call," remarked Kitty. "Doubtless somebody with papers for me," said Stepan Arkadyevitch. As Anna was passing the staircase she saw the servant going up to announce a caller, but the caller stood in the light of the hall lamp and was waiting. Anna glanced down and saw that it was Vronsky, and a strange sensation of joy, mixed with terror, suddenly seized her heart. He was standing with his coat on, and was taking something out of his pocket. At the same moment Anna reached the center of the staircase, he lifted his eyes and saw her, and his face assumed an expression of humility and confusion. She bowed her head slightly in salutation, and as she went on her way she heard Stepan Arkadyevitch's loud voice calling to him to come in, and then Vronsky's low, soft, tranquil voice excusing himself. When Anna reached the room with the album, he had gone, and Stepan Arkadyevitch was telling how he came to see about a dinner which they were going to give the next day in honor of some celebrity who was in town. "And nothing would induce him to come in. What a queer fellow," said Stepan Arkadyevitch. Kitty blushed. She thought that she alone understood what he had come for, and why he would not come in. "He must have been at our house," she thought, "and not finding me, have supposed that I was here. But he did not come in, because it was late, and Anna here." They all exchanged glances, but nothing was said, and they began to examine Anna's album. There was nothing extraordinary or strange in a man calling at 9:30 o'clock in the evening to inquire of a friend about the details of a proposed dinner and not coming in. Yet to everybody it seemed strange, and it seemed more strange and unpleasant to Anna than to anyone else. The ball was just beginning when Kitty and her mother mounted the grand staircase, brilliantly lighted and adorned with flowers and with powdered lackeys in red kaftans. In the ballrooms there was an incessant bustle of movement, which sounded like the humming of a beehive, and, as they stopped to give the last touches to their hair and gowns, before a mirror hung on the tree-decorated landing, they heard the scraping of violins as the orchestra was tuning up for the first waltz. A little old man, a civilian, who was smoothing his white locks in another mirror, and who exhaled a penetrating odor of perfumes, brushed against them on the stairway and stood aside, evidently impressed by Kitty's youth and beauty. A beardless young man, such as the old Prince Shtcherbatsky would have reckoned among the "mashers," wearing a very low-cut waistcoat and a white necktie which he adjusted as he walked, bowed to them, and after he had passed them turned back to ask Kitty for a quadrille. The first quadrille was already promised to Vronsky, and so she was obliged to content the young man with the second. An officer buttoning his gloves was standing near the door of the ballroom. He cast a glance of admiration at the blooming Kitty and caressed his moustache. Although Kitty had taken great pains and spent much labor on her toilet, her gown, and all her preparations for this ball, yet now she entered the ballroom in her complicated robe of tulle with its rose-colored overdress, as easily and naturally as if all these rosettes and laces, all the requirements of her toilet, had not caused her or her people a moment's attention, as if she had been born in this lace-trimmed ball-dress, and with a rose and 2 ribbons placed on the top of her graceful head. When the old princess, her mother, just before they entered the ballroom, was about to readjust her broad sash ribbon, Kitty gently declined. She felt that everything about her must surely be right and graceful, and that to readjust anything about her was unnecessary. Kitty was looking her prettiest. Her gown was not too tight anywhere. Her lace fichu did not slip down. Her rosettes did not crush, and did not pull off. Her rose-colored slippers with their high heels did not pinch her, but were agreeable to her feet. The thick braids of her hair kept perfectly in place on her graceful little head. All 3 buttons on her long gloves, which enveloped, without changing, the pretty shape of her hands, fastened easily and did not tear. The black velvet ribbon, attached to a medallion, was thrown daintily about her neck. This ribbon was charming, and at home, as she saw it in her mirror, adorning her neck, Kitty felt that this ribbon spoke. Everything else might be dubious, but this ribbon was charming. Kitty smiled, even there at the ball, as she saw it in the mirror. In her bare shoulders and arms Kitty felt a sensation of marble coolness, a sensation which she especially enjoyed. Her eyes shone, and her rosy lips could not refrain from smiling with the consciousness of how fascinating she was. She had scarcely entered the ballroom and joined a group of tulle, ribbon, lace, and flower-decorated ladies who were waiting for partners. Kitty never remained long in that category, when she was invited to waltz with the best dancer, the principal cavalier in the whole hierarchy of the ballroom, the celebrated leader of the mazurka, the master of ceremonies, the handsome, elegant Yegorushka Korsunsky, a married man and a civilian. He had just left the Countess Bonina, with whom he had been taking the first turns of the waltz, and, while looking round over his domain, in other words, over the few couples who were venturing out on the floor, he perceived Kitty, made his way to her in that easy manner peculiar to leaders of the mazurka, bowed, and without even asking her permission, put his arm around the young girl's slender waist. She looked for someone to whom to confide her fan, and the mistress of the mansion, smiling on her, took charge of it. "How good of you to come early," said Korsunsky, as he put his arm around her waist. "I don't like the fashion of being late." Kitty placed her left hand on her partner's shoulder, and her little feet, shod in rose-colored bashmaks, glided swiftly, lightly, and rhythmically over the polished floor. "It is restful to dance with you," said he, as he fell into the slow measures of the waltz. "Charming! Such lightness! Such precision!" That was what he said to almost all his dancing acquaintances. She smiled at his flattery, and continued to study the ballroom across her partner's shoulder. She was not such a novice in society as to find all faces blending in one magic sensation. She had not been so assiduous in her attendance at balls as to know everyone present and be tired of seeing them. But she was in that happy condition between these 2 extremes. She was exhilarated, and at the same time she was sufficiently self-possessed to be able to look around and observe. She noticed a group that had gathered in the left-hand corner of the ballroom, composed of the very flower of society. Korsunsky's wife, Lyddy, a beauty in an extremely low-cut corsage, was there. The mistress of the mansion was there. There shone Kriven's bald head, always to be seen where the flower of society was gathered. Young men were looking at this group, and not venturing to join it. Then her eyes fell on Stiva, who was also there, and then she saw Anna's elegant figure dressed in black velvet, and he was there. Kitty had not seen him since the evening when she refused Levin. Kitty's eyes instantly recognized him across the room, and saw that he was looking at her. "Shall we take one more turn? You are not fatigued?" asked Korsunsky, slightly out of breath. "No, thank you." "Where shall I leave you?" "I think Madame Karenina is here. Take me to her." "Anywhere that you please." And Korsunsky, still waltzing with Kitty but with a slower step, made his way toward the group on the left, saying as he went, "Pardon, mesdames. Pardon, pardon, mesdames," and steering skillfully through the sea of laces, tulle, and ribbons, without catching a feather, placed her in a chair after a final turn, which gave a glimpse of her slender ankles in dainty blue stockings, while her train spread out like a fan and covered Kriven's knees. Korsunsky bowed, then straightened himself up and offered Kitty his arm to conduct her to Anna Arkadyevna. Kitty, blushing a little, freed Kriven from the folds of her train, and, just a trifle dizzy, looked around in search of Anna. Anna was not dressed in violet, as Kitty had hoped, but in a low-cut black velvet gown, which showed her plump shoulders and bosom smooth as ivory, her beautiful round arms, and her delicate slender wrists. Her robe was adorned with Venetian guipure, On her head, gracefully set on her dark locks, was a little garland of heart's ease, and a similar bouquet was fastened in her black ribbon belt in the midst of white lace. Her hair, which was all her own, was dressed very simply. There was nothing remarkable about it except the abundance of the little natural curls which strayed in fascinating disorder around her neck and temples. She wore a string of pearls around her firm throat. Kitty had seen Anna every day and had fallen in love with her, but now that she saw her dressed in black, instead of the violet which she had expected, she was conscious that she had never before appreciated her full beauty. She saw her in a new and unexpected light. Now she realized that violet would not have been becoming to her, and that her charm consisted entirely of her independence of toilette. That her toilette was only an accessory, and her black gown with the magnificent laces was only an accessory, was only a frame for her, and nothing else was to be thought of but herself in all her simplicity, naturalness, elegance, and at the same time her gaiety and animation. When Kitty joined her she was standing in her usual erect attitude, talking with the master of the house, her head slightly bent toward him. "No, I would not cast the first stone, though I don't understand about it," she was saying to him, slightly shrugging her shoulders, and then perceiving Kitty she turned to her with an affectionate and reassuring smile. With a woman's quick intuition she saw all the beauty of the young girl's toilette, and gave her an appreciative nod, which Kitty understood. "You even dance into the ballroom," she said. "She is the most faithful of my aides," said Korsunsky, addressing Anna Arkadyevna, whom he had not as yet seen. "The princess helps to make any ballroom gay and delightful. Anna Arkadyevna, will you take a turn?" he asked with a bow. "Ah, you are acquainted," said the host. "Who is it we don't know? My wife and I are like white wolves. Everybody knows us," replied Korsunsky. "A little waltz, Anna Arkadyevna?" "I don't dance when I can help it," she replied. "But you can't help it tonight," said Korsunsky. At this moment Vronsky joined them. "Well, if I can't help dancing, let us dance," said she, placing her hand on Korsunsky's shoulder, and not replying to Vronsky's salutation. "Why is she vexed with him?" thought Kitty, noticing that Anna purposely paid no attention to Vronsky's bow. Vronsky joined Kitty, reminded her that she was engaged to him for the first quadrille, and expressed regret that he had not seen her for so long. Kitty, while she was looking with admiration at Anna as she waltzed, listened to Vronsky. She expected that he would invite her, but he did nothing of the sort, and she looked at him with astonishment. A flush came into his face, and he hastily suggested that they should waltz, but he had scarcely put his arm around her slender waist and taken the first step, when suddenly the music stopped. Kitty looked into his face, which was close to her own, and for many a long day, even after years had passed, the loving look which she gave him, and which he did not return, tore her heart with cruel shame. "Pardon, pardon! A waltz, a waltz!" cried Korsunsky at the other end of the ballroom, and, seizing the first young lady at hand, he began once more to dance. Vronsky took a few turns with Kitty, then she joined her mother, but she had time for only a few words with the Countess Nordstone, ere Vronsky came back to get her for the first quadrille. During the quadrille nothing of importance was said. Their conversation was first on Korsunsky and his wife, whom Vronsky described very amusingly as amiable children of 40 years, then on some private theatricals, and only once did his words give her a keen pang, when he asked if Levin were there, and added that he liked him very much. But Kitty counted little on the quadrille. She waited for the mazurka with a violent beating of the heart. She had a feeling that during the mazurka all would surely be settled. The fact that Vronsky did not ask her during the quadrille did not disturb her. She felt sure that she should be selected as his partner for the mazurka, as in all preceding balls, and she refused 5 invitations, saying that she was engaged. This whole ball, even to the last quadrille, seemed to Kitty like a magical dream, full of flowers, of joyous sounds, of movement. She did not cease to dance until her strength began to fail, and then she begged to rest a moment. But in dancing the last quadrille with one of those tiresome men whom she found it impossible to refuse, she found herself in the same set with Vronsky and Anna. Kitty had not fallen in with Anna since the beginning of the ball, and now again she suddenly saw her in another new and unexpected light. She seemed laboring under an excitement such as Kitty herself had experienced, that of success. She saw that Anna was excited and intoxicated with the wine of admiration. Kitty knew the sensation, knew the symptoms, and recognized them in Anna. She saw the feverish brilliancy of her, and the smile of happiness and excitement involuntarily parting her lips, and the harmony, precision, and grace of her movements. Who has caused it? She asked herself. All or one? She could not help her tormented partner in the conversation, the thread of which he had dropped and could not pick up again. And though she submitted with apparent good grace to the loud orders of Korsunsky, shouting "Ladies' chain" and "All hands around," she watched her closely, and her heart oppressed her more and more. No, it is not the approval of the crowd that has so intoxicated her, but the admiration of the one. And that one? Can it be he? Every time Vronsky spoke to Anna her eyes sparkled with pleasure, and a smile of happiness parted her rosy lips. She seemed to make an effort not to exhibit any signs of this joy, but nevertheless happiness was painted on her face. Can it be he? Thought Kitty. She looked at him, and was horror-struck. The sentiments that were reflected on Anna's face as in a mirror were also visible on his. Where were his coolness, his calm dignity, the repose which always marked his face? Now, as he addressed his partner, his head bent as if he were ready to worship her, and his look expressed at once humility and passion, as if it said, "I would not offend you. I would save myself, and how can I?" Such was the expression of his face, and she had never before seen it in him. They talked about their mutual acquaintances, their conversation was made up of trifles, and yet Kitty felt that every word they spoke decided her fate. Strange as it might seem, although they really remarked how ridiculous Ivan Ivanovitch was in his efforts to speak French, and how Miss Fletskaya might have found a better match, nevertheless these words had for them a peculiar meaning, and they understood it just as well as Kitty did. In Kitty's mind, the whole ball, the whole evening, everything, seemed enveloped in mist. Only the stern school of her education, serving her well, sustained her, and enabled her to do what was required of her, that is to say, to dance, to answer questions, to talk, even to smile. But even before the mazurka began, while they were arranging the chairs and a few couples were already starting to go from the smaller rooms to the great ballroom, a sudden attack of despair and terror seized her. She had refused 5 invitations, and now she had no partner, and there was no hope at all that she would be invited again, for the very reason that her social success would make it unlikely to occur to anyone that she would be without a partner. She would have to tell her mother that she was not feeling well, and go home, but even this seemed impossible. She felt overwhelmed. She went into the farthest end of a small parlor, and threw herself into an armchair. The airy skirts of her robe enveloped her delicate figure as in a cloud. One bare arm, as yet a little thin, but pretty, fell without energy, and lay in the folds of her rose-colored skirt. With the other she held her fan, and with quick, sharp motions tried to cool her heated face. But while she looked like a lovely butterfly caught amid grasses, and ready to spread its rainbow-tinted wings, a horrible despair oppressed her heart. But perhaps I am mistaken. Perhaps it is not so. And again she recalled what she had seen. "Kitty, what does this mean?" said the Countess Nordstone, coming up to her with noiseless steps. Kitty's lower lip quivered. She hastily rose. "Kitty, aren't you dancing the mazurka?" "No, no," she replied with a trembling voice, almost in tears. "I heard him invite her for the mazurka," said the countess, knowing that Kitty would know whom she meant. She said, "What, aren't you going to dance with the Princess Shtcherbatskaya?" "Oh, it's all one to me," said Kitty. No one besides herself realized her position. No one knew that she had refused a man who perhaps she loved, refused him because she preferred someone else. The Countess Nordstone went in search of Korsunsky, who was her partner for the mazurka, and sent him to invite Kitty. Kitty danced in the first figure, and fortunately was not required to talk, because Korsunsky was obliged to be ubiquitous, making his arrangements in his little kingdom. Vronsky and Anna were sitting nearly opposite her. She saw them sometimes near, sometimes at a distance, as their turn brought them into the figures. And as she watched them, she felt more and more certain that her unhappiness was complete. She saw that they felt themselves alone even in the midst of the crowded ballroom. And on Vronsky's face, usually so impassive and calm, she remarked that mingled expression of humility and fear, which strikes one in an intelligent dog, conscious of having done wrong. If Anna smiled, his smile replied. If she became thoughtful, he looked serious. An almost supernatural power seemed to attract Kitty's gaze to Anna's face. She was charming in her simple black velvet. Charming were her round arms, clasped by bracelets. Charming her firm neck, encircled with pearls. Charming her dark, curly locks breaking from restraint. Charming the slow and graceful movements of her small feet and hands. Charming her lovely face, full of animation. But in all this charm there was something terrible and cruel. Kitty admired her more than ever, and ever more and more her pain increased. She felt crushed, and her face told the story. When Vronsky passed her in some figure of the mazurka, he hardly knew her, so much had she changed. "Lovely ball," he said, so as to say something. "Yes," was her reply. Toward the middle of the mazurka, in going through a complicated figure recently invented by Korsunsky, Anna went to the center of the circle and called out 2 gentlemen and 2 ladies. Kitty was one. As she approached Anna, she looked at her in dismay. Anna, half shutting her eyes, looked at her with a smile, and pressed her hand. Then noticing that Kitty's face, replying to her smile, wore an expression of despair and amazement, she turned from her and began to talk to the other lady in animated tones. "Yes, there is some terrible, almost infernal attraction about her," said Kitty to herself. Anna did not wish to remain to supper, but the host insisted. "Do stay, Anna Arkadyevna," said Korsunsky, as she stood with her bare arm resting on the sleeve of his coat. "Such a cotillion I have in mind, un beau jeu." And the master of the house, looking on with a smile, encouraged his efforts to detain her. "No, I cannot stay," said Anna, also smiling, but in spite of her smile the 2 men understood by the determination in her voice that she would not stay. "No, for I have danced here in Moscow at this single ball more than all winter in Petersburg," said she, looking at Vronsky, who was standing near. "One must rest before a journey." "And so you are really going back tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes, I think so," replied Anna, as if surprised at the boldness of his question. But as she said this to him, the brilliancy of her eyes and of her smile set his heart on fire. Anna Arkadyevna did not stay for supper, but took her departure. "Yes, there must be something repellent, even repulsive, about me," thought Levin, as he left the Shtcherbatskys and went on foot in search of his brother. "I am not popular with men. They say it is pride. No, I am not proud. If I had been proud, I should not have put myself in my present situation." And he imagined himself Vronsky, happy, popular, calm, witty, who had apparently never put himself in such a terrible position as he was in that evening. "Yes, she naturally chose him, and I have no right to complain about any one or anything. I myself am to blame. What right had I to think that she would ever unite her life with mine? Who am I? And what am I? A man useful to no one, a good-for-nothing." Then the memory of his brother Nikolai came back to him. Was he not right in saying that everything in the world was miserable and wretched? Have we been, and are we, just in our judgment of our brother Nikolai? Of course, from the point of view of Prokofy, who saw him drunk and in ragged clothes, he is a miserable creature, but I judge him differently. I know his heart, and I know that we are alike. And I, instead of going to find him, have been out dining, and to this reception. Levin went to a street lamp and read his brother's address, which was written on a slip of paper, and called an izvozchik. all the long way he vividly recalled one by one the well-known incidents of his brother Nikolai's life. He remembered how at the university, and for a year after his graduation, he had lived like a monk notwithstanding the ridicule of his comrades, strictly devoted to all forms of religion, services, fasts, turning his back on all pleasures, and especially women. And then how he had suddenly turned around and fallen into the company of people of the lowest lives, and entered upon a course of dissipation and debauchery. He remembered his conduct toward a lad whom he had taken from the country to bring up, and whom he whipped so severely in a fit of anger that he narrowly escaped being transported for mayhem. He remembered his conduct toward a swindler to whom he owed a gambling debt, and in payment of it had given him his note, and whom he had caused to be arrested on the charge of cheating him. This was, in fact, money that Sergei Ivanovitch had just paid. Then he remembered the night spent by Nikolai at the station house on account of a spree. He remembered the scandalous lawsuit against his brother Sergei Ivanovitch, because Sergei had refused to pay his share of their mother's estate. And finally he recalled his last adventure, when after he had gone to take a position at the western frontier, he was dismissed for assaulting a superior. All this was detestable, but it did not seem nearly so odious to Levin as it would have been to those who did not know Nikolai, did not know his history, did not know his heart. Levin remembered how at the time when Nikolai was occupied with his devotions, his fastings, his priests, his ecclesiastical observances, when he was seeking to curb his passionate nature by religion, no one had aided him, but on the contrary, everyone, even himself, had made sport of him. They had mocked him, nicknamed him Noah, the monk. Then, when he had fallen, no one had helped him, but all had turned from him with horror and disgust. Levin felt that his brother Nikolai, at the bottom of his heart, in spite of all the deformity of his life, was not so very much worse than those who despised him. He was not to blame for having been born with his unrestrainable character and his peculiarities of intellect. He had always had good impulses. "I will tell him everything, and I will make him tell me everything, and show him that I love him, and therefore understand him," said Levin to himself, and about 11 o'clock in the evening he bade the driver take him to the hotel indicated in the address. "Upstairs, numbers 12 and 13, said the Swiss in reply to Levin's question. "Is he at home?" "Probably." The door of number 12 was half open, and from the room came the dense fumes of cheap, poor tobacco, and a voice unknown to Levin was heard speaking. But Levin instantly knew his brother was there. He recognized his cough. When he reached the door, the unknown voice was saying, "All depends on whether the affair is conducted in a proper and rational manner." Konstantin Levin glanced through the doorway and saw that the speaker was a young man in a peasant's sleeveless coat and with an enormous mop of hair on his head. On the divan was sitting a young woman with pock-marked face and dressed in a woolen gown without collar or cuffs. His brother was not to be seen. A pain shot through Konstantin's heart to think of the strange people with whom his brother associated. No one heard him, and, while he was removing his goloshes, he listened to what the man in the sleeveless coat was saying. He was speaking of some enterprise. "Well, the devil take the privileged classes," said his brother's voice after a fit of coughing. "Masha, see if you can get us something to eat and bring some wine if there's any left. If not, go for some." The woman arose, and as she came out from behind the screen she saw Konstantin. "A gentleman here, Nikolai Dmitrich," she cried. "What is wanted?" said the voice of Nikolai Levin angrily. "It's I," replied Konstantin, appearing at the door. "Who's I?" repeated Nikolai's voice, still more angrily. Then he was heard quickly rising and stumbling against something, and Konstantin saw before him at the door his brother's well-known figure, still remarkable by reason of his shyness and ill health, infirm, tall, thin, and bent, with great startled eyes. He was still thinner than when Konstantin had last seen him 3 years before. He wore a short overcoat. His hands and his bony frame seemed to him more colossal than ever. His hair was grown thinner, but the same stiff mustaches hid his lips, The same eyes glared at his visitor uncannily and naively. "Ah, Kostya!" he cried suddenly, recognizing his brother, and his eyes shone with joy. But the same instant he fixed his eyes on the younger man and made a quick convulsive motion of his head and neck, as if his cravat choked him, a gesture well known to Konstantin, and an entirely different expression, wild and bitter and expressive of martyrdom, came into his sunken face. "I wrote to both you and Sergey Ivanovitch that I do not know you, nor wish to know you. What do you want? What does either of you want?" He was not at all as Konstantin had imagined him. The hardest and vilest elements of his character, which had made any relations with him difficult, had faded from Konstantin Levin's memory whenever he thought about him. And now, when he saw his face and the characteristic convulsive motions of his head, he remembered it all. "But I wanted nothing of you except to see you," he replied timidly. "I only came to see you." His brother's diffidence apparently disarmed Nikolai. His lips relaxed. "Ah, did you?" said he. "Well, come in. Sit down. Do you want some supper? Masha, bring enough for 3. No, hold on. Do you know who this is?" he asked his brother, pointing to the young man in the peasant coat. "This gentleman is Mr. Kritsky, a friend of mine from Kiev, a very remarkable man. It seems the police are after him because he is not a coward." And he looked, as his habit was, at all who were in the room. Then, seeing that the woman, who stood at the door, was about to leave, he shouted, "Wait, I tell you!" Then, in his extravagant, incoherent manner of speech, which Konstantin knew so well, he began to tell his brother the whole story of Kritsky's life, how he had been driven from the university because he had tried to found an aid society and Sunday schools among the students, how afterwards he had been appointed teacher in one of the public schools, only to be dismissed, and how finally he had been tried for something or other. "Were you at the University of Kiev?" asked Konstantin of Kritsky, in order to break the awkward silence that followed. "Yes, I was at Kiev," replied Kritsky curtly, with a frown. "And this woman," cried Nikolai Levin, pointing to the girl, "is the companion of my life, Marya Nikolaevna. I took her from a house," he said, stretching out his neck, "but I love her and I esteem her. And all who want to know me," he added, raising his voice and scowling, "must love her and esteem her. She is just the same as my wife, just the same. So now you know with whom you have to do. And if you think that you lower yourself, there's the door." And again his eyes looked at them all questioningly. "I do not understand how I should lower myself." "All right. Masha, bring up enough for 3. Some vodka and wine. No, wait. No matter, though. Go." "As you see," continued Nikolai Levin, frowning and speaking with effort, it was evidently hard for him to make up his mind what to do or say. "But do you see?" and he pointed to the corner of the room, where lay some iron bars attached to straps. "Do you see that? That is the beginning of a new work which we are undertaking. The work belongs to a productive labor association." Konstantin scarcely listened. He was looking at his brother's sick, consumptive face, and he grew more and more sorry for him, and he could not compel himself to listen to what his brother was saying about the labor association. He saw that the labor association was only an anchor of safety to keep him from absolute self-abasement. Nikolai went on to say, "You know that capital is crushing the laborer. With us the laboring classes, the muzhiks, bear the whole weight of toil, and no matter how they exert themselves, they can never get above their cattle-like condition. All the profits created by their productive labor, by which they could better their lot and procure for themselves leisure, and therefore instruction, all their superfluous profits are swallowed up by the capitalists. And society is so constituted that, the harder they work, the more the proprietors and the merchants fatten at their expense, while they remain beasts of burden still. And this order of things must be changed," said he, in conclusion, and looking questioningly at his brother. "Yes, of course," replied Konstantin, looking at the pink spots which burned in his brother's hollowed cheeks. "And now we are organizing an artel of locksmiths where we will all be in common. Work, profits, even the tools." "Where will this artel be situated?" asked Konstantin. "In the village of Vozdremo, government of Kazan." "Yes, but why in a village? In the villages, it seems to me, there is plenty of work. Why associated locksmiths in a village?" "Because the muzhiks are serfs, just as much as they ever were, and you and Sergey Ivanovitch don't like it because we want to free them from this slavery," replied Nikolai, vexed by his brother's question. While he spoke, Konstantin was looking about the melancholy, dirty room. He sighed, and his sighs seemed to make Nikolai still more angry. "I know the aristocratic prejudices of such men as you and Sergey Ivanovitch. I know that he is spending all the strength of his mind in defense of the evils that crush us." "No, but why do you speak of Sergey Ivanovitch?" asked Levin, smiling. "Sergey Ivanovitch! This is why!" cried Nikolai at the mention of Sergey Ivanovitch. "This is why! Yet what is the good? Tell me this. What did you come here for? You despise all this. Very good. Go away, for God's sake!" he cried, rising from his chair. "Go away! Go away!" "I don't despise anything," said Konstantin gently. "I only refrain from discussing." At this moment Marya Nikolaevna came in. Nikolai looked up at her angrily, but she quickly stepped up to him and whispered a few words in his ear. "I am not well. I become easily irritable," he explained, growing calmer and breathing with difficulty. "And you just spoke to me about Sergey Ivanovitch and his article. It is so rubbishy, so idle, so full of error. How can a man who knows nothing about justice write about it? Have you read his article?" said he, turning to Krisky, and then, going to the table, he brushed off the half-rolled cigarettes so as to clear away a little space. "I have not read it," replied Krisky, gloomily, evidently not wishing to take part in the conversation. "Why?" cried Nikolai, irritably, still addressing Krisky. "Because I don't consider it necessary to waste my time on it." "That is, excuse me, how do you know that it would be a waste of time? For many people this article is inaccessible, because it is above them. But I find it different. I see the thoughts through and through, and know wherein it is weak." No one replied. Krisky slowly arose and took his hat. "Won't you take some lunch? Well, good-bye. Come tomorrow with the locksmith." Krisky had hardly left the room when Nikolai smiled and winked. "He is to be pitied, but I see—" Just at that instant Krisky, calling at the door, interrupted him. "What do you want?" he asked, joining him in the corridor. Left alone with Marya Nikolaevna, Levin said to her, "Have you been long with my brother?" "This is the second year. His health has become very feeble. He drinks a great deal," she said. "What do you mean?" "He drinks vodka, and it is bad for him." "Does he drink too much?" "Yes," said she, timidly looking toward the door where Nikolai Levin was just entering. "What were you talking about?" he demanded with a scowl, and looking from one to the other with angry eyes. "Tell me." "Oh, nothing," replied Konstantin in confusion. "You don't want to answer? All right, don't. But you have no business to be talking with her. She is a girl. You a gentleman," he shouted, craning out his neck. "I see that you have understood everything and judged everything, and you look with grief on the errors of my ways." He went on speaking, raising his voice. "Nikolai Dmitrich, Nikolai Dmitrich," whispered Marya Nikolaevna, coming close to him. "Well, very good, very good. Supper, then? Ah, here it is," he said, seeing a servant entering with a platter. "Here, put it here," he said crossly. Then taking the vodka, he poured himself out a glass and drank it eagerly. "Will you have a drink?" he asked his brother, immediately growing lively. "Well, no more about Sergey Ivanovitch. I am very glad to see you. No matter what people say, we are no longer strangers. Come now, drink. Tell me what you are doing," he said, greedily munching a piece of bread and pouring out a second glass. "How are you living?" "I live alone in the country, as I always have, and busy myself with farming," replied Konstantin, looking with terror at the eagerness with which his brother ate and drank, and trying to hide his impressions. "Why don't you get married?" "I have not come to that yet," replied Konstantin, turning red. "Why so? For me? It's all over. I have wasted my life. This I have said, and always shall say, that if they had given me my share of the estate when I needed it, my whole life would have been different." Konstantin hastened to change the conversation. "Did you know that your Vanyushka is with me at Pokrovskoye as a bookkeeper?" he said. Nikolai craned out his head and wondered. "Yes, tell me what is doing at Pokrovskoye. Is the house just the same, and the birch trees, and our study room? Is Philip, the gardener, still alive? How I remember the summer house and the divan. Just look here. Don't let anything in the house be changed, but hurry up and get married, and begin to live as you used to. Then I will come to visit you if your wife will be kind." "Then come back with me now," said Konstantin. "How well we should get on together." "I would come if I knew I should not meet Sergey Ivanovitch." "You will not meet him. I live absolutely independent of him." "Yes, but whatever you say, you must choose between him and me," said Nikolai, looking timorously in his brother's eyes. This timidity touched Konstantin. "If you want to hear my whole confession as to this matter, I will tell you that I take sides neither with you nor with him in your quarrel. You are both in the wrong. But in your case the wrong is external, while in his the wrong is inward." "Ha, ha! Do you understand it? Do you understand it?" cried Nikolai with an expression of joy. "But if you would like to know, personally I value your friendship higher because—" "Why? Why?" Konstantin could not say that it was because Nikolai was wretched and needed his friendship, but Nikolai understood that was the very thing he meant, and frowning darkly, he betook himself to the vodka. "Enough, Nikolai Dmitrich!" cried Marya Nikolaevna, laying her great pudgy hand on the decanter. "Let me alone! Don't bother me, or I'll strike you!" he cried. Marya Nikolaevna smiled with her gentle and good-natured smile, which pacified Nikolai, and she took the vodka. "There! Do you think she does not understand things?" said Nikolai. "She understands this thing better than all you. Isn't there something about her good and gentle?" "Haven't you ever been to Moscow before?" said Konstantin, in order to say something to her. "There now, don't say you, to her. It frightens her. No one said view to her except the justice of the peace when they had her up because she wanted to escape from the house of ill fame where she was. My God, how senseless everything is in this world!" he suddenly exclaimed. "These new institutions, these justices of the peace, the Zemstvo, what abominations!" And he began to relate his experiences with the new institutions. Konstantin listened to him, and the criticisms on the absurdity of the new institutions, which he had himself often expressed, now that he heard them from his brother's lips, seemed disagreeable to him. "We shall understand it all in the next world," he said jestingly. "In the next world? Ouch! I don't like your next world. I don't like it," he repeated, fixing his timid haggard eyes on his brother's face. "And yet it would seem good to go from these abominations, these entanglements, from this unnatural state of things, from myself. But I'm afraid of death, horribly afraid of death." He shuddered. "There, drink something. Would you like some champagne? Or would you rather go out somewhere? Let's go and see the gypsies. You know I am very fond of gypsies and Russian songs." His speech had begun to grow thick, and he hurried from one subject to another. Konstantin, with Masha's aid, persuaded him to stay at home, and they put him on his bed completely drunk. Masha promised to write Konstantin in case of need, and to persuade Nikolai Levin to come and live with his brother. The next forenoon Levin left Moscow, and toward evening was at home. On the journey he talked with those near him in the train about politics, about the new railroads, and, just as in Moscow, he was overcome by the chaos of conflicting opinions, self-dissatisfaction, and a sense of shame. But when he got out at his station and perceived his one-eyed coachman, Ignat, with his kaftan collar turned up, when he saw, in the dim light that fell through the station windows, his covered sledge and his horses with their tied-up tails, and their harness with its rings and fringes, when Ignat, as he was tucking in the ropes, told him all the news of the village, about the coming of the contractor and how Pava the cow had calved, then it seemed to him that the chaos resolved itself a little, and his shame and dissatisfaction passed away. This he felt at the very sight of Ignat and his horses. But as soon as he had put on his sheepskin tulip, which he found in the sleigh, and took his seat in the sleigh comfortably wrapped up, and drove off thinking what arrangements he should have to make in the village, and at the same time examining off the horse, Donskaya, which used to be his saddle horse, a jaded but mettlesome steed, he began to view his experiences in an absolutely different light. He felt himself again, and no longer wished to be a different person. He only wished to be better than he had ever been before. In the first place, he resolved from that day forth that he would never expect extraordinary joys, such as marriage had promised to bring to him, and therefore he would never again despise the present. And, in the second place, he would never allow himself to be led away by low passion, the remembrances of which so tortured him while he was deciding to make his proposal. And lastly, as he thought of his brother Nikolai, he resolved that he would never again forget him, but that he would keep track of him and not let him out of sight, so that he might be in readiness to aid him whenever the evil moment arrived, and that seemed likely to be very soon. Then the conversation about communism, which he had so lightly treated with his brother, came back to him, and made him reflect. A reform of economic conditions seemed to him nonsense, but he always felt the unfair difference between his own superfluity and the poverty of the people, and in order that he might feel perfectly right, he now vowed that though hitherto he had worked hard and lived economically, he would in the future work still harder and permit himself even less luxury than ever. And all this seemed to him so easy to accomplish that, throughout the drive from the station, he was the subject of the pleasantest illusions. With a hearty feeling of hope for a new and better life, he reached home just as the clock was striking 10. From the windows of the room occupied by his old nurse, Agafya Mikhailovna, who fulfilled the functions of housekeeper, the light fell on the snow-covered walk before his house. She was not yet asleep. Kuzma, wakened by her, hurried down, barefooted and sleepy, to open the door. Laska, the setter, almost knocking Kuzma down in her desire to get ahead of him, ran to meet her master and jumped upon him, trying to place her forepaws on his breast. "You are back very soon, Batyushka," said Agafya Mikhailovna. "I was bored, Agafya Mikhailovna. It is good to go visiting, but it's better at home," said he, and he went into his library. The library slowly grew light as the candle that was brought burnt up. The familiar details little by little came into sight: the great antlers, the shelves lined with books, the mirror, the stove with a hole which ought long ago to have been repaired, the ancestral divan, the great table, and on the table an open book, a broken ash-tray, a notebook filled with his writing. As he saw all these things, for a moment the doubt arose in his mind if it would be possible to bring about this new life which he had dreamed of during his journey. All these signs of his past seemed to say to him, "No, thou shalt not leave us, thou shalt not become another, but thou shalt still be as thou hast always been, with thy doubts, thy everlasting self-dissatisfaction, thy idle efforts at reform, thy failures, and thy perpetual strivings for a happiness which will never be thine." But while these external objects spoke to him thus, a different voice whispered to his soul, bidding him cease to be a slave to his past, and declaring that a man has every possibility within him. And, listening to this voice, he went to one side of the room, where he found 2 40-pound dumb-bells, and he began to practice his gymnastic exercises with them, endeavoring to bring himself into a condition of vigor. At the door there was a noise of steps. He hastily put down the dumb-bells. The intendant came in and said that, thanks to God, everything was all right, but he confessed that the buckwheat in the new drawing-room had got burnt. This provoked Levin. This new drawing-room he had himself built and partially invented. But the intendant had been entirely opposed to it, and now he announced with ill-concealed triumph that the buckwheat was burnt. Levin was sure that it was because he had neglected the precautions 100 times suggested. He grew angry, and reprimanded the intendant. But there was one fortunate and important event. Pava, his best, his most beautiful cow, which he had bought at the cattle show, had calved. "Kuzma, give me my tulip. And you," he said to the intendant, "get a lantern. I will go and see her." The stable for the cattle was immediately behind the house. Crossing the courtyard, where the snow was heaped under the lilac bushes, he stepped up to the stable. As he opened the frosty door, he was met by the warm fumes of manure, and the cows, astonished at the untaught light of the lantern, stirred on their fresh straw. The light fell upon the broad black back of his piebald Holland cow. Berkut, the bull, with a ring in his nose, tried to get to his feet, but changed his mind, and only snorted as they passed by. The beautiful Pava, huge as a hippopotamus, was lying near her calf, snuffing at it, and protecting it against those who would come too close. Levin entered the stall, examined Pava, and lifted the calf, spotted with red and white, on its long awkward legs. Pava began to low with anxiety, but was reassured when the calf was restored to her, and began to lick it with her rough tongue. The calf hid its nose under its mother's side, and frisked its tail. "Bring the light this way, Fyodor, this way," said Levin, examining the calf. "Like its mother, but its color is like the sire's. Very pretty. Long hair and prettily spotted. Vasily Fyodorovitch, isn't it a beauty?" he said, turning to his intendant, forgetting in his joy over the newborn calf the grief caused by the burning of his wheat. "Why should it be homely? But Semyon the contractor was here the day after you left. It will be necessary to come to terms with him, Konstantin Dmitrievitch," replied the intendant. "I have already spoken to you about the machine." This single phrase brought Levin back to all the details of his enterprise, which was great and complicated. And from the stable he went directly to the office, and after a long conversation with the intendant and Semyon the contractor, he went back to the house, and marched straight up to the drawing room.